Good afternoon. Today we shall look at philosophical foundations of research. So, when we want to carry out research, before we begin research, we should have some idea about different possibilities, different aspects of research, especially why do we carry out research? What are the systems that we have to follow? And what are the different ways in which research can be carried out, and so on. So there is some logic behind it. Also, there is some philosophy. So we think of now philosophical foundations of research. So we may come across some technical terminology because there are some ideas which can be expressed using some technical terms very effectively. So we don't have to give a very lengthy description. So in order to avoid a lengthy description, we use some words known as terminology or nomenclature. And sometimes if this nomenclature or terminology becomes very technical, even sometimes people call it a jargon. So let us look at the different ways in which research can be first understood. So first we have to understand what are different aspects of research, what are different ways in which research can be classified, and then we can go to the methodology. So there will be some other lectures also that will talk and cover different methodologies of research. So what I am going to talk about is the philosophical foundations. That is, as humans, we have some morality, we have some ethical standards, and so on. So we want to justify our research activity as appropriate for the human beings, not harmful to the society, contributing to the knowledge, the contents, and so on. So there are certain philosophical approaches or aspects that we must take care of in our research. So we look at some aspects, philosophical foundations. So what are the basic elements of research from the point of philosophy, in the sense of ethical, moral, and say societal. That is, our research should not be harmful to the society. Our research should not harm any individuals, and so on. And also, it should not be considered as ethical theft. We may have heard of the problem of plagiarism. If I write some article, if I write some material and submit it as my own work, and if it is found that many of these lines in my writing are already or have already appeared in some other material, in published material, then it is called plagiarism. That is stealing some material from some other source and claiming it to be my own writing. So up to plagiarism, there are various aspects. But plagiarism is more of a methodological aspect, not philosophical. So we look at only the philosophical foundations of research. So one word that comes immediately in the literature on research is known as epistemology. So what is epistemology? It is the study of the nature of knowledge. So when we claim that we know something, then the simple question is to consider how we know, how other people did not know or have not come to know, but you have come to know. So how do we know? So in knowledge organization, we make statements about knowledge of the concepts, knowledge of acts, knowledge of different entities, and knowledge of different systems. So knowledge can be at a very simple level, knowledge of different aspects, acts, objects. Concepts, knowledge of concepts is more difficult. For example, why mathematics is found to be difficult by many people is because mathematics involves many mathematical operations, addition, multiplication, division, exponentiation, raising to the power, logarithms, and so on. So they are more difficult. In language, grammar is more difficult. So we learn these things so that we say our knowledge of language has improved. So we make statements about knowledge of different aspects like concept, act, and so on. Now, knowledge is created as the result of research. So the very reason why research is important is because a common objective of research is to create or generate new knowledge. So knowledge is created as the result of research. Now, as we found earlier, epistemology is the name of study of the nature of knowledge. So knowledge can be of different types. So identifying the type of the knowledge is called epistemology. Now this activity also have some other names. So some common names for the epistemic approaches, that is approaches which are epistemological in nature. There are different names applied by different disciplines. For example, there is one word pragmatic. We may have heard this word pragmatic approach, pragmatic research, pragmatic say claims and so on. So pragmatism is a belief, a system of belief. Positivism, so positivistic approach is also considered as equivalent of epistemic. Operationalist, sometimes what we do, we have a concept, but the concept is very abstract. So what we do, we try to understand it by understanding how it operates. So operationality of it. For example, in philosophy, it is said that the say the standard moral behavior is to tell the truth, never lie. Now there is a question of how do we make telling the truth operational. So operationality is an important aspect because sometimes what happens, we can hide the truth in some description. So if necessary, we say that, oh, I told the truth, but we hide it in such a way that that truth is not clear. So it will be a problem of operationalistic behavior. Referential, so we can give reference to something. So it is also part of epistemic approach. Instrumental, so we sometimes say that somebody's role is instrumental in deciding. So think of an organization and the organization has to make a decision. And then we will say, okay, there is a very key person whose approach or whose decision is instrumental in deciding the direction in which the organization goes. So instrumental is also an equivalent word. Empiricist. So by empirical, we mean describing something that has already happened or that is happening. That is called empirical. So what is the importance of the word empirical? Very often in research, we say that empirical, the research can be empirical or experimental. So what is experimental? When there is nothing pre-existing, we generate the data and we analyze the data. So that is experimental part. But when we collect data which already exists and analyze it and try to understand something, then we have an empirical approach. So empiricist approach, rationalist. Now what is rationalist? So when we try to identify reasons, reasoning is called rationalization. So the rationalist approach. What does it mean? That something is not very radical, something can be explained. So we call it a rationalistic approach. Realist. So if I try to talk of some ideal thing which is not realistic, that is which may not be realized any time, then that is not the part of epistemology. So realist. So there are some realistic approaches. That is something that if it has not happened so far, at least it is possible that something will happen. so realist, and so on. So there are many words which are replacement or which are equivalent, have the same meaning as epistemology. So epistemology is one major important aspect because it is study of the nature of knowledge. That is, I want to study different ways in which I want to analyze the knowledge. So each of these approaches claims to identify the nature of the knowledge that can be generated through research. So the objective of the research is to generate knowledge. Now, obviously, when I claim that I have generated some knowledge by carrying out research, then there has to be some proper description. What have I found? So, what are my research activities, and what is the result, and so on. So, the question also is how it can be gathered. So, when I generate new knowledge through research, how do I gather this knowledge? That is also a question. So in ordinary language, very often we make observations. So observations are the result of my knowledge. Think of a simple question. I give an examination, or I give a test, multiple choice test to the students. So students will give replies. Question number one, four options are given: A, B, C, D. If a student selects A, then the feedback will be whether this response A is correct or not. That is useful for evaluation. Student comes back and suppose the answer is wrong. The student will come back and say, okay, I do not know what is the true answer. I have selected A, but it has, in the evaluation it has come out to be a wrong answer. So can I now know what is the correct answer? So there are different levels at which information is gathered, information may be distributed. So what will happen if I give him the key? That is, if I tell him, okay, these are the correct answers, then he will also try to understand, analyze, and decide or identify where he went wrong. Why did he select a wrong option, and so on. So knowledge can be generated through research. Also, how it can be gathered. So only generating knowledge is not enough. We have to also collect it and put it in organized way. So gathering the information. So in this sense, knowledge can be considered as the outcome of some activity. So just as an agriculturist or a farmer grows the crop, but then the crop has to be gathered. Otherwise, it cannot be taken to the market and has no value. Similarly, generating knowledge is not enough, it has to be gathered. And what is the activity of gathering? Very often we call it knowing, understanding. So these epistemic approaches make it possible because they present a systematic view of the reality. So why do we recommend an epistemological approach or epistemic approach to our activity is because any of these approaches makes it possible to present a systematic view of the reality. So whatever is happening, everybody cannot go and observe it. So I want to make a presentation. So I want to view it from a certain point of view. So I should be able to make a systematic view or take a systematic view of the reality. And then the knowledge of this reality. So reality is what exists. Our knowledge of the reality is what we can describe and convey or communicate to other people, and the meaning that emerges from this knowledge. So whatever I observe and whatever I describe must be also meaningful. So there has to be a meaning in what I am describing, what I am observing, and therefore epistemology covers all of these activities. So it is the name of the discipline that deals with the question of the way of understanding and explaining how we come to know about what we claim to know. So if I go and say that, oh, do you know, I have found this out. People ask me, okay, how do you know? So I have described something. Then they say, okay, what we understand, something has happened and you are concluding this. Now, please tell us, how do you conclude what you have concluded from what you have observed? So, how do we know what we know? What is the procedure that brings us from the observation to knowledge? So, that is epistemology. So, an obvious question is, what is knowledge? Knowing, what does it mean by knowing? What do we understand by knowing? So, the purpose of research is to gain knowledge. Everybody agrees on that. Why do I want to carry out research? I want to gain knowledge. Now, knowledge is classified into different levels depending on the way we acquire the knowledge. So, very often the knowledge is not classified by what it is, but how it is obtained. So, it is obtained, classified by the way in which we acquire it, or the method we use to acquire the knowledge. So, knowledge is considered like an entity, like an object. So, we can acquire the knowledge. We can collect the information, process it, and what we get is the knowledge. So, information is very specific to a given situation. Knowledge is a general understanding, and therefore, knowledge is more abstract than the information. Information is more concrete because it is observed in a particular situation. For example, I go to the market, I find price of rice, I find the price of wheat, I find the price of oil, and I find out the prices of some commodities. This is information. And as the in collection of information, when I get information on 15 or 20 different products, what do I understand from this information? So many pieces of information. I say, oh, uh, uh, the objects have become more costly. The prices are high. Now, prices are high is a single statement. What is the basis on that? I found the prices of all these objects. So, prices or objects have become, food items have become costly, is my knowledge. Price of each item is information. So, knowledge is broader than information. So, there is a question, at what level is my knowledge? So, are there different levels of knowledge? So, in this sense, what we find, there are usually three levels of gaining knowledge. So, when I gain knowledge, at what level is my knowledge? So, usually we consider the knowledge, acquisition of knowledge at three possible levels. So, first is known as primary knowledge, secondary, and tertiary. The tertiary means third party. So, what is primary knowledge? Very often, primary knowledge is also called first hand knowledge. We know the words, commonly used word second hand. So, somebody purchases a bicycle, and then after some time, they want to purchase a scooter, so they want to sell the bicycle. So, somebody purchases this bicycle, and it is called a second hand. Why second hand? Because the first hand bicycle is purchased from a shop, and second hand bicycle is purchased from some owner who has already purchased the bicycle, so it becomes second hand, that is secondary. And third hand is when second hand person also sells this bicycle. Similarly, primary means if I go and collect data, I consider this to be primary data. If somebody has collected data and has made it available to me, for me it is now secondary data, because I have not collected data, so I don't know, or I may not be responsible for correctness or accuracy of that data. I say, okay, somebody has already collected, made it available to me, so it is convenient for me because I am saving lot of effort and money and time in collecting the data. So that is secondary data. And third is known as tertiary, the third hand. That is, now imagine that someone carries out research, collects data, that is primary data, publishes a research paper, that is secondary. Some people use this data and publish their research papers, that is secondary data. Then an author who is writing textbook does not get data from the original person, but gets the publications based on that data, and uses those publications to write information about that product. So that is tertiary. So when the knowledge is based on secondary data, that is tertiary. So third party use in a sense. That is, I am neither the developer nor the direct user of the development or knowledge, but a third party. So knowledge can be also acquired at different levels. So my role as the knowledge seeker can be the primary knowledge is when I actually conduct some activity and gain the knowledge. Now this activity can be an experiment where knowledge or information gets generated and I observe it, like an agricultural experiment. So the farmer actually goes to the field, sows the crop, waters it, treats it, maybe uses a fertilizer, uses a pesticide, and at the end of the season, at the time of harvest, gets the crop yield. So primary data. The second possibility is secondary data. That is, I go to a website and some data set is available, so I download it and I use it in my analysis. So that is secondary data. Third possibility, I find 5 research papers and then I have tried to analyze something that is reported in the research papers. So I don't have even access to the original data. All that I have is access to the results of the analysis. So we call this tertiary, or sometimes it is also known as meta-analysis. That is, analysis of the results of analysis is meta-analysis. Now what we learn from our own experience is first hand or primary knowledge. So in the school, children are taught in the classroom, and then there are some experiential learning. What is experiential learning? Field work, field trips, and so on. So there, the children learn firsthand. That is, they actually carry out an activity and learn. A child begins to acquire primary knowledge by experiencing different situations. So when a child cannot speak and therefore also very often does not understand the language, we cannot communicate much to the child. And still child is growing, child is learning. So how is the child learning? By experiencing. Suppose the child goes near the gas stove and suppose the child touches the vessel in which the tea is being made. The child may burn the finger, but the child learns. So, and henceforth, what will happen? The child will avoid going near the stove, will avoid going to the or touching those vessels and so on. So, child will learn by experiencing. So, at the early age in the life, all our learning is first-hand learning. When we go to school and when we learn from a teacher, then teacher is teaching us from a textbook. So teacher is not teaching us from his or her own experience, but from textbook. If somebody experiences something and reports to us and we believe in that, then we are taking secondary knowledge. Suppose an athlete goes to a competition, wins a medal, and he's giving an interview on the television, then what we learn from that interview is secondary knowledge. That is, somebody who has actually acquired the knowledge firsthand is passing it to us. But when we read from a textbook, then that is a tertiary knowledge. And therefore, people who write textbooks must be careful. Why? Because when they write something in the textbook, neither they have acquired the knowledge firsthand, very often they may not also have acquired the knowledge secondhand. That is, unless they read an original research paper, they may not have it. So they may also depend on some other book, reference book. So a child is a very good example. The child's growth is a very good example of understanding the difference between primary knowledge and secondary knowledge. So secondary knowledge is obtained from another person without actually experiencing anything. So I may not have fallen in a pit, for example. If I walk and there is a say obstacle on the road, so before I hit my vehicle on that obstacle, if I find somebody hitting that obstacle then I avoid that. So that is secondary knowledge. So secondary knowledge is acquiring some knowledge without experiencing it. And therefore it is called secondary because somebody else has experienced, but by observing, I find it, I understand. So I don't have to experience, but till I have got the or acquired the knowledge. Tertiary knowledge is obtained from a source that provides secondary knowledge, and therefore it is called tertiary. So especially textbooks provide us with tertiary knowledge because the author of the textbook has not carried out experiments. He is not an experimenter. He is an author. So typically, what happens? The author of the book gets the information from some research paper. So for this author, it is secondary information, and the author writes it in the textbook. So for us, it becomes tertiary information. So sources of information also have to be understood. Why? Very often it is found that the primary information is more reliable because it is directly reported as is being observed. Secondary information is not so reliable because we are not sure whether everything that was observed is being reported. So if there is some, say, bias, reporting bias, what can happen? The author who has actually collected data, first-hand collection of data, may report only convenient values, may not report values which are not convenient according to his or her theory, and therefore secondary data is less reliable than the primary data. And then the tertiary data, obviously, we have no control. Somebody collected the data, reported in some research papers, an author of a book got convenient or useful part from that research paper and used it in his or her book. So when I read a so-called textbook, the textbook will never contain primary data. The textbook also may never contain even secondary data. What is contained in the textbook is tertiary. That is, the textbook will say that so and so author has analyzed data collected by some other person. So that other person who is collecting data has the primary data. The person who has analyzed this data has used it as secondary data, and the textbook writer is using this, reporting all these as the tertiary data. And therefore, when we read textbooks, textbooks are typically reports, and they provide us with tertiary data. So a laboratory experiment is the source of primary knowledge because the experimenter will observe actually what is happening. So a laboratory experiment is the basic, whether the experiment is in the laboratory or in the field, but experimental data is the primary source of data. And whatever we understand, whatever knowledge we get out of that is called the primary knowledge because we observe directly what is happening. So when we report what we observe, so as some things happen, we observe and report. That is the primary data. A project report or a research thesis also includes a research article or research paper. So it provides us with secondary knowledge because we know something from a person who has gained primary knowledge. So a researcher conducts an experiment, collects the data, analyzes the data. On the basis of this analysis, writes and publishes a research article. When I read the information, when I read the research article, what I have got now is secondary knowledge because the researcher has actually generated the primary knowledge. I am now using it, taking it from the author, so it is for me secondary knowledge. So we know something from a person who has gained the primary knowledge, so for me it becomes secondary knowledge. And a textbook or a reference book provides tertiary knowledge because what we read in a textbook or a reference book is neither the primary source of knowledge nor the secondary source of knowledge. Why? When could it be primary source of knowledge? If we had actually obtained the collected the observations, so it could not come in a book. Why is it not a secondary source of knowledge? Because it is not the primary knowledge of the author. If the author had conducted the experiment and reported it, it would become secondary for us. But usually, when a researcher carries out activities, analyzes the data, then the primary information is published in the form of a research article or a research paper. But when there is a textbook, usually textbook is based on already published work, and therefore textbook is based on secondary information, secondary knowledge. So it becomes the tertiary knowledge. Whatever is contained in the textbook becomes tertiary knowledge. Now, is it good or bad? So typically what happens, on one side it appears that the primary knowledge is better, is the best. Secondary knowledge is somewhat compromised, and tertiary knowledge is not so good because it is not original. Now look at it from a different approach, the other way. Primary knowledge is directly from the observer to the reader. So no, very little processing may have happened, and therefore there can be doubts about the validity of the primary knowledge. Secondary knowledge, somebody may have already carried out some experiments, carried out analysis, verified the assumptions, verified the required properties of the data, and so on. And therefore secondary knowledge, even if it is not primary, may be more reliable in the sense of validity. So we should not say that primary is best, secondary is not so good, and tertiary is the compromise. So it is not necessarily so. So on the other hand, what can happen? The primary source of knowledge may be unverified. The secondary source of knowledge may also be a little subjective because it depends on who is analyzing data and how the analysis results of the analysis are being reported. Whereas tertiary, in the tertiary, the person who is writing has access to so many research articles, and therefore this person can select the most appropriate result from so many secondary sources. And therefore, if we think of reliability or validity, very often the tertiary information is more reliable than the primary or secondary, because primary can be some experience which may not be properly generalized, and therefore it can be limited to the experiences of the author. So there are two ways of looking at it, and therefore we have to take a judgment, and we have to also understand and then decide whether the primary information is more reliable or the tertiary analysis information more reliable. So there is no universal rule, but usually what is found is the primary data source especially is more reliable because it usually does not involve much of processing. Secondary source has some processing, so it can happen that certain observations may not be reported, certain observations may be modified, and so on. So some processing has occurred between the primary information and secondary information. So if I know what is the process, I may decide, okay, this process is good because it is improving the quality of data. But in absence of such thing, right, so knowing these approaches is called transparency in the data, in the process. So somebody describes that I observed these things and I have modified these so that what I get are more realistic or more appropriate numbers. So that transparency should be there. If transparency is lacking, then secondary data may not be as valuable as the primary data. And if further processing is hidden, then the tertiary data may not be very useful. It may be very good, very attractive, the data behavior, so to say, like the normality of distribution and so on. So there may be some good properties of the tertiary data. Now what we have to do, we have to now think of the contrast. Do we want more realistic and more reliable data, or do we want very more good looking data? Good looking in the sense that, okay, I think that, okay, some data may be normally distributed. So if my data looks more normally distributed, I will call it good looking data. Why? Because in the analysis later on we'll find that when data is normally distributed, many statistical methods are available. So normal data is subject to more statistical analysis than non-normal data. So if data satisfies a desirable property, then the question is it really the property of the data or is it an approximation? So tertiary information, secondary information or primary information decides the quality of the observations, quality of the data. So if we read a book, then the information that we read or obtain in a book is neither primary source of knowledge nor secondary source of knowledge, because it is not the primary knowledge of the author. As a consequence, what happens? The textbooks provide us high quality verified knowledge because it has been processed by several people. So on one side, it is not very reliable because it is not neither primary nor secondary. On the other hand, because the same data may have been already processed by many people, therefore, if there are some flaws in the data, they must have been identified and brought to the notice of the researcher and so on. So by the time we get it to the textbook, any flaws, any mistakes, any problems would be removed. And therefore, now when such a data appears in a textbook, it is considered to be more reliable. So in turn, these reference books are based on some research articles and some other reference books. So because they are based on material which has been generated by processing the information, the processes must have corrected if there are mistakes and so on, and therefore these articles become more reliable. So it does not mean that the primary source of information gives us better information and secondary source is not so good and tertiary is not very good. It is not necessary. So very often tertiary information is also good because it has been pre-processed. So maybe some bad observations are removed, so some filtering may have happened, some processing has certainly happened, and therefore we don't have a universal rule about whether primary, secondary, or tertiary data, which of these three is better. So we have to look at the data, we have to look at what is the process, what is the pre-processing that has taken place, and we have to decide. So as a result of the activity of passing the knowledge from one book to another, the contents are checked and verified. So when I get some knowledge from a book which gives reference to another book, so all these data and their properties are already being analyzed multiple times, and therefore now the knowledge that we obtain from such a book is now more reliable because so many people have analyzed it. So if there was any mistake or there is any flaw, they would have identified it, and therefore a common practice is to trust a textbook more than a reference book. So very often teachers tell us that okay, there may be a good reference book, but try to find a textbook. Why? Because the textbook is considered to be more standard than a reference book in the sense that the textbook author tries to find out more resources, more places where the same conclusion has been obtained. So they say, okay, if so many people have found out under different conditions, then this must be a reliable result, a dependable result. Similarly, research activities can also be classified according to the activities as well as objectives. Activities means what is being done, and objectives mean why it is being done. So, for example, I will read some names: empirical research, experimental research, analytical research, logical research, argumentative research, conclusive research, provocative research, and so on. So there are many ways in which a research activity can be described. What is empirical? Empirical in literally sense, that is by the verbal meaning is what exists already, that is pre-existing, empirical. Experimental is where the data is generated by the experiment. So this data did not exist before our experiment. When we conduct an experiment, we get data. So the difference between empirical and experimental is where in empirical we can control the conditions. Sorry, we only observe because whatever is already existing is only being observed. In experimental, we create the situation of an experiment, and therefore very often we can control the experimental setup. So as a result, what happens? Experimental data is more reliable than empirical data, because empirical data is only obtained from the reality, from the world. And because we don't have any control over the world, there may be some underlying causes of variation in the observations without our understanding, without our knowledge. And therefore, when what we expect is empirical data will show more variability than experimental data. In experimental data, when observations are obtained under identical conditions, then they are expected to behave very similarly. So experimental data is very useful for analysis, but it is very often costly, time taking, or even requiring large manpower to conduct experimental data. Therefore, people still use and trust and believe in empirical data. They have to depend on empirical data because there are many situations where an experiment would be costly. Whereas in the world, the data may be already available. So empirical data is the pre-existing data. Experimental data is data generated purposefully for the purpose of research and so on. There can be third possibility, analytical. So analytical research. So what is analytical research? We carry out, or we have analytical arguments. So very theoretical. So especially philosophy, mathematics, and some social sciences, they can have even analytical researches. The fourth is logical. That is, we have observed something, and now we try to find logical relations among the entities or among variables that we observe. How are they related? So logical. There can be argumentative. So I only develop an argument to justify what I have observed. So I try to make an argument why the observation on this variable came out to be so and so. Why, suppose there is a healthy person and the healthy person's body temperature is in the danger zone, and the person says, I am feeling well, I have no problem. Then obviously it will come to argumentative. So we ask this person, why do you think that you are okay, you are well, not sick? Because what we find is your body temperature is in the red zone. So argumentative. This person may give us some arguments to show or to prove that he is okay health-wise. Conclusive. Sometimes our research ends with saying that there is nothing conclusive. That is, we cannot conclude because there is no clear evidence to accept or not to accept a certain hypothesis. So there can be still some ambiguity. So when we remove all the ambiguities, we call this research conclusive research. So we have come to a conclusion. So conclusive. Provocative research. Sometimes what happens? People carry out a research activity, analyze, and the result is not very convincing, is not final, but it is provocative. That is, it provokes people to make some arguments. So provocative also is a part of possible research activities. Why do we carry out provocative research? To get more response or to make more people work in the same field. So if we want to invite more people, I will carry out some provocative research activities. So people, at least in order to challenge my findings, will carry out some research. So provocative also is a motivating approach. Similarly, research activities can also be classified on the basis of the nature of the activities, evidence. So first we try to differentiate or classify the research activities according to the activities. Now we want to classify the activities, research activities, according to the nature of the evidence, that is observations. So for experimental research, observations are the evidence. For argumentative research, arguments are the evidence. So for example, philosophers always make arguments, they debate, or the court of law, for example. In the court of law, what happens? The lawyers of the two sides, they make arguments. So all the evidence is argumentative. And therefore, it is also one part. of the research. So research activities can be classified on the basis of the nature of the evidence, that is the observations used in the research. So research based on observations that result, that is observations that have come from an experiment conducted by the researcher, is experimental research. So when the researcher carries out an experiment or carries out experiments and collects observations from these experiments and carries out further research, then we call such observations experimental data. So research based on observations, that observations have come as the result of an experiment conducted by the researcher, then we call such a research empirical research. Sorry, experimental research, experimental data, therefore experimental research. On the other hand, research based on observing what is already present is called empirical research. For example, in a physics or chemistry or biology lab, an experimental setup is made, the experimental situation is created, the experiment is conducted, and certain observations are made. So these observations could not be made outside this setup, therefore it is experimental. On the other hand, my interest is in finding the educational level of 15-year-old boys in different communities. So what shall I do? I shall first get a list of people from different communities, from maybe municipal corporation, municipal council, or municipality, as the case may be. So from the local government, I will try to find the list of people at having education at different levels. And then what shall I do? I cannot go to all of them and find out. So I select a sample from each of these categories. Then I go to only visit those people and ask them what is the level of their education, how much have they learned, did they go to college, if they did not go to college, at what standard they left the school, if they went to college, what is the degree. So I'll get information on their academic achievement. And now my conjecture is more educated people more educated people have better jobs. Suppose this is my claim. What shall I do? I shall on one side collect the information on the educational level of people in the my sample, and then find out their occupation, maybe their monthly income, maybe their salary, and so on. And then I try to associate the educational level, education completed, and the income, and then what is the purpose, so I can verify my claim. So I began with the possibility or claim that the educational level determines the income. So does my data verify, or does my data support this claim? So I have experimental data, sorry, empirical data, because people are already, they are in jobs. They may not be in jobs, though their people may be employed and or unemployed. They have learned at different levels. Their educational levels are achievements are at different levels. So all that I do is data collect the data that is already there. Only nobody went to ask them, so I am doing for the first time. So they give me responses. I collect data and I analyze it. So this is called empirical research. Carrying out research on data that pre-exists, that already exists, is empirical. So it is based on such a research is based on observing what may have escaped the attention of many. So empirical research does not guarantee, sorry, does not generate any new evidence. It is only based on what is already there, what based on observing what may have already been there. But now sometimes what we do, we go to details and we try to find out observations which have been neglected or ignored by other people, and then from the same data under the same situation I may try to find out something new. So very often there is a question that after so much of information available already in the market or in the books, so much already known, where is the scope for any new research? So these are one possibility, that there may be some data and people have gone with the majority of the data. So I may look at the exceptional cases and try to understand. So there is still scope for research after even generalizing from the available data. So for example, in social sciences, empirical research is very common. Why? Because society is already there, social standards are already present. A new research may find some unexpected patterns of communication in a particular society. So, what we expect in an educated society is for communication to take place in a certain way. For example, if we think of a college system, then how does communication take place in colleges? So, if you look at the communication from the top to bottom, that is from the principal to the student level. How does the communication travel from the principal to the an individual student? So now we have path. So what is one possible path? The principal conducts a meeting of all the heads of the departments, and the heads are that is every head of the department is of a subject. So the principal informs these heads that okay, convey this information to your students. So the head goes back to the department. The head may also call a meeting of all the faculty. Then the head says, okay, at 11 o'clock in the morning, when you go to the class, inform your students so and so. So this is the information that the principal wants to convey to the students. So what should teachers do? Teachers, after going to the class, they convey the information to the students. Is this enough? Then the head again finds out the timetable and finds out okay, classes, the so many classes have got the information, but some classes, some students may not have any lecture at 11 o'clock. There may be students who have lecture only at 12 o'clock, so these exercise may have to be repeated. So now decisions are to be made according to the situation. But what is common? The classes are already defined. The declaration is to be defined. The process is to be defined. So teachers will have to convey the information. So how they convey information, how fast, and so on. So here experimental material is the students. Students are experimental material. Why? Because after say 1 week of such declarations, I may go to students and ask them, have they understood, have they received this information, have they understood the information? So sometimes what happens, students say, I was absent, therefore I did not know. Some students may say I was present, but I was writing, completing some homework, so I did not have attention, I do not know. So students may have different responses. Now what I want to do, I want to understand the effectiveness of my communication to the class. So what shall I analyze? I shall first ask the student, did the student receive this information? If yes, then what is the response? How did the student change his or her behavior, her practice in presence of such an information? If the student has not received the information, then we can ask, okay, when were you present in the class? When were you absent in the class, from the class, and so on? And then we try to match, was this student present when the announcement was made? If this student was present when that announcement was made, then we say that you were not paying the attention. So some penalization should be there. So our interpretation depends on what we observe. Now this observation is not on the content, but it is observation on the claim. The student says that I was in the class, but I did not know this. Then we can analyze and find out that this student did not pay attention to that notice. So social standards are already present. A new research may find some unexpected patterns in communication in a particular society. So it can happen. So what is the value, or why is empirical research also important? Because primarily, ideally, the experimental research is the best. Why? Because we actually conduct the experiment and verify. That is, the findings can be challenged because somebody else may conduct a similar experiment under different conditions, analyze the data, and if they find that their conclusions are different from our conclusions, somebody may go to a court of law and challenge it. But as the result of my own activities, what do I do? I understand the effect of a certain activity or performance of students in an exam and so on. So there can be empirical research. So empirical research is about measuring and analyzing data collected under an experimental setup. Sorry, empirical setup, that is pre-existing data. Now there is a way, different way in which we can compare experimental data with empirical data. So in what aspect do we compare them? Experimental data is generated by our setting up of the experiment. And when we set up the condition of the experiment, excepting where we allow the variation, no other variation takes place. So data is more homogeneous under the experimental setup. On the other hand, when we say empirical setup, what do we mean? We only control certain variables. Other variables are uncontrolled, therefore they are free to change. And therefore, we expect more variation even among observations under similar conditions in empirical research, because there are many other variables, many other conditions which may not be common. And therefore empirical research is more tolerant to variation. So if I think of the level of significance, then we may allow a higher level of significance for an empirical research in social sciences, for example, than an experimental research. So empirical research has some standards, experimental research has some other stricter or stringent standards. So social standards are already present. A new research may find some unexpected patterns in the communication in a particular society. For example, I have now think of some example, practical example. The principal of a college, you can think of your own college. So the principal of the college may want to inform all students of the college some new policy or new rules of the university. So the principal receives a letter from the university, and the university has informed that okay, now the following new rules or new policy will be implemented in all the colleges. So principal wants to inform all the students. The question is, how should the principal do it? Is there any unique way, or are there options? Are there different ways in which the principal can do it? And then comparing different ways, we can identify the best way to communicate this information to the students. So we start thinking, and when we start thinking, we can realize that this can be achieved in many ways. For example, the one of the possible ways is to make an announcement on the public address system. The college has a public address system, so the principal can use that public address system where whatever is announced in that system is heard in every classroom. So the simplest way, so to say, simplest way is to for the principal to make an announcement on the public address system, and then assume that because I have made the public announcement system, every student has heard it and the students know about it. That is one way.